All right, hello. Here we are again. Gonna continue reading and studying and figuring out my notes from Focusing-Oriented Psychotherapy by Eugene Gendlin. This is part 5. I'm realizing that it's kind of funny to give them parts because there's gonna be a lot of parts. If you see where we are, maybe like 10-ish% of the way through. So there will be a lot of parts to this. But we just finished last time. The different dead ends. So we talked about like intellectual dead ends, where you just get stuck mentally explaining it, but without referencing the felt sense and without referencing, without referring to raw experience, right? And that's what I've talked about in the couple of other videos I've done in the last week. Raw experiencing, not referencing, putting attention into that just raw experience of life in your body, right? All the things that you feel, all the internal movements and feelings. So you can get caught in a loop and go nowhere if you're just intellectualizing about things, coming up with stories, coming up with reasons, interpretations, without referencing your raw experience and sensing for if there is any actual movement going on. And likewise, there's the other dead end, which is just repeated emotional experience, where you just have the same exact emotional triggering, for example, over and over again, and it never changes because you kind of, again, you don't, it's weirder with that one because emotional experiences are so felt in that way, but you can have them without exploring the unknown aspects of the emotional experience, right? Like, it could just be like, I'm fucking angry, without paying close attention to, like, what does that anger feel like? What is there more than anger? Is it, like, what's at the edge of anger? I keep using this term now. I guess I've really kind of that piece of language from Gendlin has really seeped into my vocabulary, the murky edge of that experience, right? It's like, that you're angry, but if you pay attention, what does it feel like? Is there something more? And theoretically, also experientially, there's always going to be something more, some quality that you can't quite articulate, right? I'm angry, but there's also this other thing that I can't put into words, but it's there. It's not just anger. It's like anger, but in this particular way, right? And if you don't do that, then you never take steps and create movement and like reshape your internal experience by moving forward through it and symbolizing that raw experience, because you basically have just one symbol that you're constantly being like, ugh, I'm angry. That's it. That's the whole thing, right? And nothing new ever arises. So those are the two dead ends that we explored previously. Now we are on chapter 3, 8 characteristics of an experiential process step. Something can emerge from the unconscious without one's being able to sense its source. Honestly, I don't know. There's no context for this, so I'm not entirely sure what that means. Without being able to sense its source. Like, source could mean a variety of things. It's been a while since I read this chapter, so I think we'll just have to keep going. But I'm going to hypothesize like source as in you can't say exactly right. Are we talking like physical source? Are we talking like memory source, like where in one's life it fits in, right? If it's a something, right, something could be anything. Something like a thought, a feeling, a memory, an image, a felt sense. It can emerge without being able to sense its source, right? Like you can't say like it came from exactly where. I don't know. Again, so source is, what the hell is source? I forget for now. Okay. So, but it is also possible at various depths to sense the source directly. There can be a direct awareness of the border zone between the conscious and the unconscious. For example, if one cries, one can turn one's attention inward and sense the crying place from which the tears are welling up. Or if a strong emotion comes, one can focus on the inward sense of which that emotion is a part. Yeah, okay, so again, source still is vague, but it sounds right. He says the crying place, right? There's like a place you can kind of be like, it's there, it's in my chest, or it's in my face, or it's in my throat, or something like that. But not necessarily just that, but that's one way to think about it. The place in you, like Anne Weiser Cornell, who wrote The Power of Focusing and was one of Gendlin's students, she often, in the focusing steps, talks about noticing something. And Gendlin, I've heard him use that less and more often say somewhere or someplace. So someplace in you, there's that. Rather, where Anne Weiser Cornell would say, I'm noticing something in me. Gendlin would be, you're noticing this thing, someplace in there, there's a thing, a something, someplace in there, somewhere in there, there's a thing. Right, so there's a way to talk about location in your inside of your body, in your felt sense. So I don't know if that's entirely what he means by source, but I'm also thinking about, he talks about this border zone thing. And I've been doing somatic meditation for about 4 years now, specifically learning from this guy named Reggie Ray, who wasn't a student of Gendlin, but was pretty influenced by Gendlin. He was actually the first place in his meditation program. Somatic Descent was the first place I ever heard of focusing and Gendlin. And the somatic experiencing, or somatic descent, in essence, the practices are about, I think I've described this in other videos, but practicing that interoceptive capacity, practicing at a very deep and prolonged way, that turning inward to notice one's felt sense throughout one's body. Feeling your body from the inside. That's basically the whole point of this style of somatic meditation anyway. And he often talks about tension when you're going into your body and noticing the tension in your body, that the tension is the border zone between the conscious and the unconscious, right? And if you think about that, it makes sense of that, like that we use tension physically at greater and lesser degrees, right? In very obvious ways and then very subtle ways. We use tension as a way to defend ourselves and block out feeling, right? Also block out external things, right? If you're gonna get punched, you tense yourself. as a protective mechanism. You harden your body against this thing that's going to hit you. You basically are creating a stronger boundary through that tension, right? And I give this example a lot of, like, if you are not someone who's comfortable with crying, or if for whatever reason you're in a situation where it's inappropriate to cry, but you have that impulse to cry, how do you stop yourself? And a lot of it is in muscular tension, gritting your teeth, right? Increasing tension in your face, like in your throat, in your chest. You kind of like stiffen up. You harden your face and the front of your body in order to not cry, and it kind of suppresses the feeling, and you block the feeling from happening. I was talking to another friend about this the other day. Like, when you're thinking really hard, we have this tendency to furrow our brows, right? It's like, what's the point of that? Well, in a way, it's like, by furrowing your brows, you're tunneling your attention, right? You're cutting out peripheral vision. You're creating like this tunnel of attention through your, like, laser beam tunnel vision through your eyes, right? So you can focus, and you're cutting out your awareness of other parts of your body, of other things going on in your environment. Right? And so we use muscular tension to keep things at bay. So in the somatic meditation, he talks about this. We're going in and sensing our bodies, literally down in our toes, one by one, sensing the tension in our toes, or sensing the tension throughout our feet and elsewhere. And that tension is the border zone between what we have consciousness of and what we don't. And as we go and we put our attention on the tension, and we can sort of begin to relate to the tension in a new way, even just by becoming aware of it, and the tension can slowly recede, and more of our unconscious becomes conscious. That's how he talks about it. And I would say that in many ways that's what is happening in focusing, right? You're like, oh, I have this felt sense, but there's this border edge of that felt sense beyond which I can't really see, and the border is fuzzy itself. But then you approach it, you approach that border, and you're like, what is that? And you begin to symbolize it, you begin to make it more clear. And as you do, more of what was past that border becomes clear. I guess I've never really talked about it this way, but yeah, you go to that edge to where it becomes murky, and then as you begin to symbolize it and get clarity around that through the focusing process, what was beyond that border, what was murky, becomes clear, and you've just gone further. You've brought what was unconscious into consciousness, right? And of course, there's always going to be more further steps that you can take, but you've just gone to the edge of consciousness, kind of like reached out and brought or pushed the border of consciousness further into the territory of what's unconscious. Anyway, that's a way to think about it. It was interesting. I was like closing my eyes the entire time I was trying to explain that. Yeah. So border zone. Source is, I guess, like that border zone or just past the border zone. Even in simple conversation, an individual can attend inwardly so that something directly sensed can come in. One can stop and sense the place that one is trying to get at, the place that one is speaking from. This sense is always much richer than what one says in words, and one cannot know all that is or could be in it. This is what I mean by the implicit. Yeah, I've talked about this a lot in other videos. Right? It's not explicit. You don't yet have a form. I talked about it a lot, or he talked about it a lot in the one about improvisation provides, and that distinction between form and that which sort of bubbles up from underneath and around form, that, like, if we go to a concert or a play, we don't want to just see a perfect by the book rendition of that piece of work. We want to see it have some kind of unique life in it that's provided by the actors, by the musicians, by the composer, or not the composer, but the conductor, right? The particular director. What do they bring to it around the edges of the form? Because that's the unique life brought to it by those people. Without that life, in a way, it would just be dead. It would just be dead form. So yeah, the implicit is that which is not explicit, that which is not formalized, that which is not given a word yet. It's that which is in and beyond the border zone. Without such direct sensing of the source, the client can experience only what has emerged. Then one can only add interpretations to it. Yeah, so this kind of reminded me of what I said earlier about the dead end of repeated emotions, right? Where it's like what has emerged is anger, right? And you have a name for it. You can call it anger, or maybe you even have a more nuanced word, and you're like, I'm just frustrated, or I feel rage, right? But you're not directly sensing the source. You're not feeling into the raw experience, the murky edge of that rage or that frustration or that anger. So all you have is that form. So then all you can do is try to like intellectualize and interpret that thing that you have, but you're not getting anything new. You're not continuing to proceed into and wade into and clarify the unconscious surrounding of that thing that you felt. You just have the symbol. You have, that's what my feeling is. It's just anger. That's it. But if you actually sense into it, there's more. There's more to it. So yeah, you have an intense emotion, and then you get caught just trying to intellectualize and interpret it. Not to say that you can't, as you interpret it, do the process of referring to your felt sense. You absolutely can. So it doesn't mean you're necessarily stuck. But if you don't do that, if you don't directly sense your experience, then you will probably get stuck. The direct sense of the implicit source is always unclear at first. Vague, fuzzy, not recognizable as a distinct emotion or a familiar feeling. Yeah. Pretty self-explanatory. What one senses at the border zone is unclear, in that one does not know what to say or how to characterize it. Yet it is definite in that one senses unmistakably that it has its own unique quality. One cannot be talked out of this unique, unnamed quality, and one cannot be talked into feeling it as something else. Yeah, so it's unclear in as much as it's not explicit. You don't have words for it, right? You don't even know yet how to describe it, and that's the challenge of focusing. That's the challenge of finding a handle, right? How do I put a word to this? That's the difficulty. You're going from something which is not language, something which is not conceptual, and trying to make it conceptual, trying to give it a handle, and that's not easy. That's what focusing is at its core, making that which is raw experience symbolized into a concept, into something that you can talk about explicitly, making the implicit explicit. Right, so in that sense, you don't know what it is, it's not explicit yet, and yet you are aware of it, right? You can feel it, you can sense it, you can be aware of something without being able to describe it, right? And that's a huge trap, is like if you think, or for whatever reason you feel like if it's not able to be articulated, that you can't be aware of it, then you're going to be blind to a lot of our experience of life, right? If you're like, well, there's nothing more than what I can name, there's nothing more than what I can describe, there's nothing more than what I already have words for, then yeah, you're going to be stuck, because there's a lot of things that we don't have words for. Right, so we can be absolutely aware of this thing without having words for it. And no one can tell you otherwise. I mean, people could try to tell you otherwise, and if you're prone to take on someone else's opinion over your own experience of yourself, then you might be talked out of it. But it's there, you're aware of it, it's in your body, no one else has access to that. Consider a person who tells you about a problem. After 20 minutes, perhaps the person stops. Everything that can be said about it seems to have been said, and yet, ... The problem is felt as more than that. The edge is felt, but it is unclear. I'm sure you've had this experience, right? Talking about a problem, but it's like, I haven't been able to say everything about it, but I don't know what the fuck else it is that it needs to be said, right? There's something more, and you can feel it, but you can't describe it. That's where focusing comes in. Or you are focusing already. If you're noticing that, you're like, there's something more that I can sense that there is something more that I haven't said yet, but I don't know what that is. You're already focusing. And it's in that something more where probably the breakthrough is going to come, right? Because you've already said everything that you know. You've already said everything that's explicit. And if all you needed was what you already know and what's explicit, then why is the problem there? You know? But if you sense into that something more, the edge, then you'll get a new sense of the problem. You'll gain further clarity about what's going on, why it's a problem, what's making it stuck. Sometimes a person's experience does not seem to have any edges for a long time. More often, the edges seem missing because the pace of the person's talk is too rapid. To say To stay with something directly, to stay with something directly felt requires a few seconds of silence. It can be anxiety producing. People are likely to go on talking and to move to something else, and soon again to a still further point. In that way, people mostly stay outside of themselves. Yeah, if you just move fast, you keep yourself from sensing, right? It's like this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then what about this, and what about this, and what about this idea, like blah, 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 right? If you're doing that, unless you have a deeply, deeply like trained ability to be sensitive to what's going on in your body, you're moving so fast in your head, in your thoughts, that you're not going to be able to tell and notice what's going on in your experience, in your felt sense, right? And so speed can be a way of blocking out experience and skipping over experience. It's not the only way, right? Like I've talked about this on Twitter, that in the past I've been so shy and afraid to speak and speak quietly when I speak, etc. That too is a way to kind of cut off a lot of experience, because when you speak, you feel it. If I don't say anything, and I also don't have a good ability to notice myself internally, then I cut off all of that feeling that comes with speaking, right? And maybe you've had this experience, I think I've talked about on Twitter, but like, maybe you love somebody. I hope you do. Right? And at least for me, there's such a radical difference between thinking it, having the thought like, oh, I love this person, I love you, and actually saying that out loud, let alone saying it out loud to the other person. You might be like, yeah, I love you, in your head. But if you say it, you might be like, and then you choke up and you almost start crying. Because in the speaking, you're using your whole body, and the feeling comes. So for me, I've always been a very slow speaker in general. So that problem of skipping over things with speed has not been my problem, but I've also been such a quiet speaker, let alone just don't speak that much, that I've in that way skipped over experiencing what's going on inside of myself, or this is largely why I record videos most of the time now, because writing too can keep you from really feeling what you're saying, especially if you're just on a computer or like typing, right? It's not that, because you can type so fast, right? So you can use typing to be, you're caught up in like the fingering of it and like what fingers to use and how to spell things, right? So you're already abstracting from the actual thing that you're trying to express by having to spell out the language, right? But we can also type so much faster than we can speak a lot of the time. So it's a double whammy of being abstract and then fast and not out loud. So you're basically like completely distancing yourself from any ability to feel what you're expressing as you type. So I don't generally like to type things anymore. Certainly not things like this, certainly not things like journals, where the emotional quality is essential. Yeah. They ignore the edges and repeat the main packaging. Yeah, right. Just like what I was saying before. I'm angry, and that's it. There's nothing more. You're not sensing the edges. It's just the package, right? You have a concept, you have a word for it. Anger. I'm angry. Over and over again. Hendrix, by the way, is his wife. Yeah, so these are, what's the chapter called again? 8 characteristics of experience. So, characteristics, the source, directly sense source, initial lack of clarity. Maybe I'll just bold this stuff. Okay, and then it occurs in a bodily way. A direct sense of the border zone occurs bodily as a physical, somatic sensation. It is sensed in the viscera, or the chest, or throat, some specific place, usually in the middle of the body. So, Gendlin was very much about saying, like, the felt senses in your torso, right? Like in your throat, in your belly, in your chest. Others who have expanded on his work, like Ann Weiser Cornell, they're like, well, why do we need to limit it to that? Because there are sensations and felt senses that we have elsewhere, right? In our arms, in our hands, in our legs, in our feet, whatever. Like it can occur anywhere. So it's unnecessary to limit it to just that front torso area of us, but nonetheless, it is one of the primary places. That's where your heart is, that's where your lungs are, that's where your gut is, right? So there's a lot there from which feeling and sensation can be happening, right? So it's not without a reason why we are focused on that area of our bodies, but it can be elsewhere too. Many people cannot sense their bodies from the inside. For example, some people can sense their toes only if they first move them. Yeah. I mean, I had an interview, or I did an interview, rather, that's going to be on YouTube soon, with a friend of mine from Twitter. For whatever reason, I feel like I just will leave his name out of it for now, but we talked about, he's a trainer, exercise, right? Fitness. He's an athlete. He was like a college athlete. So he's deeply bodily, right? He's not like just totally estranged from his body. And yet, over the past month, I shared with him the somatic meditation, and he's been doing it, and that's kind of been blowing his mind of getting more sensitive to the sensation in literally like in his toes, right? Because in the somatic meditation, you're just going and you're spending like 5 minutes without moving your toes. Spend like 5 minutes just sensing, putting your awareness in your big toe and noticing everything you can about it, right? So you're noticing, like, can you notice the temperature of the air on your skin? Can you notice like different spots on your toe? Can you put your attention and notice the tip of your toe? Can you notice the top of your toe, the bottom, the side where it touches your next toe? Can you feel your toenail, right? Can you feel the joint? Can you feel the bone in your toe? Can you feel tension, like muscular tension? Can you feel that transition where your toe goes and becomes the main part of your foot? Can you feel all that stuff without moving it, right? And it's very hard. Even when I mean, if I like kind of neglect to do this for a bit, it takes practice to get back into that sensitivity. And certainly when I started doing somatic meditation, like it took me many tries to have that actual sensitivity to notice all the different nuance in my toe, and that's not to say that I've noticed all of it, right? Like, my toes are changing every single day, like their experience, the tension, what I've been doing, what I've been walking on, the shoes I've been wearing, my own emotional experience generally, it changes the experience of my toe moment by moment. So it's never something that you can finally explore. But also, you can continually develop your sensitivity, right? And I'm talking about my toe, but this applies to like literally every part of you. But before that, I also never tried. I never had really tried until I started doing the somatic meditation, so I can't say for sure, but I don't think I really had much awareness of like how my body felt from the inside. But luckily that is something that you can learn. That ability to be sensitive and more aware is something that you can learn. Certainly these people also have intense emotions, but they locate them all around or in and around their head. Yeah, right? So you can't place it. It's just like, I'm angry. But it's like, where? How are you noticing it? And you might not have the ability or the sensitivity or the awareness to say, oh, like I'm feeling this intensity in my chest or like my jaw or like in my face or whatever it is, right? Like it's just, I'm just angry and that's it. Or it's like in my head somehow only. Freud's term, pre-conscious, referred to something different from this. What we can be aware of if we choose, such as available memories and feelings. In contrast, he thought that unconscious material cannot be sensed anytime we like. Freud thought in terms of content, the material. For him, the preconscious was the realm of available material. I'm just going to keep reading. What I am referring to is the layer of the unconscious that is likely to come up next. This is at first sensed somatically, not yet known or opened, not yet in the preconscious. Freud had no term for this layer, nor has there been a term for it in the common language. We now call it a felt sense, right? So a felt sense is that border zone. You can sense it, but you don't have words for it. It's implicit. It's not something that you just can choose to be like, oh yeah, there's that thing, I just haven't been thinking about it, but it's this thing and I know how to talk about it. So it's not fully there for you and just like out of your thoughts right now, nor is it fully unaware, right? Because you're aware of it, you're feeling it, you're sensing it in yourself, but it's still murky, it's still implicit. That border zone between the known and the unknown, between the aware and the totally unaware. It's that middle piece. Right? I mean, like, he hasn't said this, but I've read Phenomenology of Perception, and earlier this year I was in a reading group again to read that book, Merleau-Ponty, and he talks a lot about horizons. And a horizon is not a thing, right? You can never arrive at a horizon, but the horizon is that border zone between what you're aware of and what's beyond. And you can move constantly closer to the horizon, but you'll never arrive at it. But as you move towards it, you gain more and more and more clarity of the things that from where you are now are far away and still sort of like blurry. So you can move towards that. More can come. You can proceed on your journey, right? Take steps towards the horizon. You'll never arrive at it, but you'll make a journey. You'll experience a lot. You'll travel. You'll have a life constantly approaching the horizon and clarifying more and more and more. But there's always something beyond the horizon. There's always something on the other side of that border zone, right? So the felt sense is kind of like the horizon between where we are and what's past the horizon, right? Suppose your belt feels too tight. You loosen it and feel better. The tightness was the physical sensation. But suppose you loosen your belt and the tightness remains, then that is your physical sense of a situation. Right? It's not coming from the outside. Right? You're not being constricted from the outside. There's some kind of constriction and tension on the inside. Right? You can be naked and feel extremely tense, extremely locked up, like you have a knot in your belly, like your chest is caving in. And clearly, if you're naked, nothing is doing that to you, but it's happening, and you can sense it. Usually, a felt sense must first be allowed to come. It is not already there. A felt sense is new. It is not already there as a bodily sensed object. It comes freshly, in something like the way tearfulness or yawning come in us. Yeah. In my video yesterday about the 6 steps, right? There's that part where he describes I still don't have the best grasp of all the 6 steps, but what is that feeling? Sensing, getting a hand. I mean, it's pre getting a handle, right? It's like, okay, clearing a space. So let's say you just sit down and you're like, okay, I'm sitting down now. What is there? What is between me and feeling all good right now? What's on my mind? What am I noticing? Right? And then you begin to take some time, and then you notice things. You're like, oh, there's this thing, and I have this feeling about it, right? There's this problem at work, and I have this feeling about it. But maybe until you sat down and you sort of let that stillness and sensitivity happen, you weren't aware of that. So the felt sense comes fresh. I mean, sometimes you already have it. Maybe you're just feeling intensely, so you're just like, okay, well, I have this feeling. But then again, the felt sense is that murky edge, right? So it's like, I'm like, really tense, and I've been just tense all evening, and finally I'm in bed, and it's like, okay, what is that? Like, what's going on? And you kind of like, maybe you vent out loud to yourself or your partner, right? And it's like, okay, there's all that, but what else? There's something more. What's the felt sense there? That's the thing that comes freshly. I think I'm just going to read one more section. So the felt sense is a whole. A characteristic of this felt sense is that it is experienced as an intricate whole. So I feel like I might just need to go on for there to be more to that. Right? But there's intricate, right? So intricate meaning like, as opposed to complex. Those are two similar words, but intricate means like there's fine detail to a thing, right? Right, like an intricate carving, an intricate wood carving, or an intricate statue or something like that. Intricate painting, like there's really so much detail to it. And it's a whole, so it's not... Yeah, here, I might just read this. It is a whole complexity, a multiplicity implicit in a single sense, right? So there's a lot to it. It's intricate. There's a lot of detail and nuance and small detail, right? And like the closer you look, the more you notice, kind of thing. But all of that is sort of like you can feel it all at once in your body. It's just this sense that you have, right? Because it's so a felt sense is not necessarily like, oh, it's just this like little ache that I have in my finger. I mean, it can be that, and you can start with that, but felt sense generally is like a broader thing, a whole body thing, even. Scratch that. I'm not gonna say it's like a whole body thing necessarily, but it's more than just like a little tiny feeling in one part of your body. It can start from that, but then you get, okay, what's the sense there? Like, how do I feel about that? What's the surrounding sense, right? And then it expands. It's like, okay, now you have like a whole body or a bigger sensation in you about, a bigger feeling in you about maybe that little bit of pain, right? Maybe you have that little bit of pain, and then your whole larger felt sense is like of like resisting it, like trying to push it away, trying to like withdraw yourself from the pain, you know? So it's not the pain, but it's like the whole sense, the whole feeling that you have about it. With the emergence of such a single bodily sense comes relief, as if the body is grateful for being allowed to form its way of being as a whole. The bodily sense becomes something in and of itself, a fact, a piece of data, something that is there. The person has that something that is there. It is something you have, but not something you are. Before, you were that way of being. Now, you are the new living that is ongoing as you sense how you were. How you were is now something you have in front of you. It has become the object to which you attend, right? So that's similar to what, like in internal family systems, you talk about unblending from a part, right? So you may be blended, but the ideal, the goal is to unblend from a part so that it's something, a part that you can then sit next to without being it. Unblend so that it becomes distinguished from you, right? And that's how you get into self in IFS anyway. You unblend from the parts so that you can be the curious, compassionate, whatever, all the C's, right? And engage and relate to the part as a separate entity from you. And so similar here. And that's like a little language trick that I've talked about Ann Weiser Cornell using, right? It's like, I notice something in there. Something. I notice, right? it's not that I'm mad. It's I notice some anger in there, right? Gendlin too with his someplace. So somewhere in there, there's anger, and I notice it. That's not to say that I am angry, but I notice someplace, somewhere in there, there's anger, right? So you're creating that distance, not banishing the feeling, right? Not trying to escape it, but creating enough distance that you can relate to that thing that you notice as an object for you to be with and relate to. So that's what, a felt sense is, or that's how we try to be with a felt sense, is that we go from feeling, oh, I just feel this, to being like, oh, I notice this. And as you progressively clarify and symbolize it more, it becomes this sort of object. I have a feeling, not I am the feeling. I have this thing in me. I notice this thing in me. And now I can talk about it. I can ask questions of it, etc. Right? But I have some distance. Yeah, okay. So I am going to just say, I'll stop here, leave myself a note. Here. Okay, and if you watched, thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day. Take care. That was weird. Take care. I appreciate you watching. If you watched, I make these for me, really, so that I can learn more. But as I told some people yesterday, if other people get something out of it, if other people enjoy listening to these, then man, that's just a pretty wonderful thing, and I'm grateful to you for that. So if you have been watching and listening, thank you. And until next time, take care.